You know, Alero, we started the other time by talking about those 3 Qs.
Those
3 Qs. Q for fuel, Q for banknotes,
Q for PVC.
Q for PVC. Enough mental stress.
How do you cope with all that stress?
And those are fresh stresses or stressors.
Not to mention the ones at home.
The ones you had before these new ones came up. And the 3 of them are coming at about the same time.
So, how do you cope? That is the issue this morning.
And the year is just starting.
We have a mental health consultant, Chris Aboje, with us this morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Again.
Again, yes.
Yes. First of all, how would you describe what we just spoke about? There's all kinds of issues at home. Then we're faced with these 3 Q-U-E-U-E, not Q. Those Qs. I'm sure you saw some of them coming in here this morning, for the fuel especially.
Yes.
Maybe you tried to get some of the new money and you had to queue at some ATM as well.
Well, I've not tried that yet.
Well,
So you avoided that stress.
Exactly, and I think that brings us to learning to choose our struggles or our stressors.
Our stress.
Yes, because just like he mentioned, these stressors will keep on coming up. Some of them we don't expect, some of them are new, like what we're experiencing right now. But if we try to face all of them at the same time, then we will get overwhelmed. So the idea is to choose your battles and choose them rationally.
You know, when somebody offers you a drink, offers you drinks and says, choose your poison. Choose your stress.
Choose your stress.
Choose your
There are
stress.
some of them that cannot be avoided. For instance, the fuel queues.
You need fuel.
You have to get fuel to go anywhere.
Yeah.
If you don't, you have to look for someone who does or hop on a bus, which could be a lot more expensive.
That's more stressful.
And more stressful.
Yeah.
The PVC cards terminal, you have to get it before a particular date.
Yeah.
31st.
Is the deadline for the money one.
The queues for the money.
For the money stress.
For the money stress.
Yeah.
It's just 3 days away. In fact, wait a minute. The PVC, I think that one should end.
29.
Tomorrow is 29,
Yeah,
right?
29 tomorrow.
So all of these all coming at you in torrents. And that's beside the ones that you came into the new year with. That's beside, you know, health challenges you're managing, family stress, you're a spouse, you're a mother, you're a father, you're a child, and all of those things all in the mix. I don't know why.
Give up. Give up. Give up. Just give up, please. Give up.
So maintaining a mental stability and still be mentally productive before you can be functionally productive, that's another thing altogether.
Yes, yes, you're correct. In fact, when we look at stress, stress is majorly your perception. It's a natural response, by the way, but it's a natural response that the body initiates as a way of helping us deal with threats, like what we're experiencing right now. But I think one very key thing that we can learn from that definition of stress is that it's a response to perceived threats. That means that while dealing with stress, one thing that is very important is how you see it, right? Now, there are some situations, just like we mentioned earlier, that you can do something about, that you can change, right? And there are some that we can't do anything about at the moment. It's that you need to know the difference. You know, in mental health, there's something we call the serenity prayer. And the prayer just talks about having the serenity to accept the things you cannot change and having the courage to change the ones that you can change, but most importantly, having the wisdom to know the difference.
Desiderata.
Ah.
Isn't that desiderata?
Well, yes. That's the serenity prayer for us. Yeah. So it's basically knowing, you know, having these 3 things, the serenity, the courage, and the wisdom. Because if you try to change everything, you know, you get stuck. And yes, like you said, there are a lot of deadlines. But thank God this is not a political or, you know, anything. But from a mental health perspective, I would say that if you cannot deal with everything all at once, take your time. You know, take it one step at a time. You know, live in the moment. Because if you try to fix everything all at once with all the deadlines here, you probably will get, overwhelmed and break down as well. And if you do break down, then you can't do every other thing that you need to do.
But when there are deadlines, that means you don't have a choice.
There's always a choice.
You're saying I should choose.
Yes.
Okay, if I don't change my money before Tuesday, that means that money is gone. That money becomes trash. And in this day and age, who wants to be losing money that they don't have to?
True.
Money is scarce. So I'm going to meet that deadline if it kills me. Well, okay, I don't want to be dead.
Of course, now you see that.
Yeah, I don't want to be dead, but I do want to have my money changed. And if I don't buy fuel, I won't be able to go out. So I have to go buy fuel. If I don't get my PVC, I won't be able to vote. I have to be able to vote. I want to be able to vote.
So if you look at, take for example, the exchange of the currency, for an example, you would see that, and this is where being proactive also comes in. Right, being proactive in the sense that, of course, we know that the timeline might be too short for a lot of people, but we've had the message, for a while now. Now, this is not to say that you can exchange everything, but what you can do is that you can limit the amount of old notes that you take up, so that at least that allows you to exhaust the old notes that you have. Right, so that's a way of responding in that kind of a situation. But of course, we also know the challenge of going to the ATM and realizing that you still have, when you're trying to withdraw money, you're getting back the same old notes.
So you're trying to get rid of.
That's a challenge. So what many people need to do is to look for other ways, like learning to work with electronic banking, for example. Now that's a way that can mitigate the risk. One thing that we also need to come to accept in life is that you can never erase risk. Right, you can't. Right, life is filled with risk and threats. The best that you can do is to try to mitigate it. That's the goal. The goal is to say, hey, you know what can I do to reduce it to a barest minimum? So we need to come to accept that, hey, no matter what I do, there'll still be this amount of risk here and there, but I can try my to an extent to reduce the level of risk that I'm exposed to. And while you're on that journey of reducing the risk, you can also, the only thing you can control right now, we can't shift the deadline. What we can choose to do is that we can also change how we see the situation, how we perceive the situation, giving yourself a new narrative to the situation. And the good news is that the brain doesn't work with reality. The brain works with perception. And that means that if you can create your own perception, the brain is just going to work.
It's okay with your mind.
Exactly.
Slow down. So, because, I mean, you're making it sound like I am living a crazy life. So you're saying, okay, so the fact is I don't have cash. What am I supposed to perceive?
Well, you're supposed to find a narrative here. Say, you know what, I don't have cash. For example, say if I was to come up with a narrative for myself, I'll say, you know what, I don't have cash, and this would help me save more because it would limit the amount of money that I spend.
I see.
So that's my narrative.
It's easy for you to say.
I see.
But okay, now speaking to, this whole preparing for difficult times and maintaining the mental stability and all of that, some of them come as such a rude shock. At the risk of going political, there are other issues that will come at you when you least expect them. For instance, just 1-2 days ago, we heard that the election in Osun State, the governorship election has been, what's the word now? Well, the governor has been removed, according to the Election Petition Tribunal. That definitely didn't come expected.
Sure.
The ones who were there before are rejoicing. The ones who are in government now are panicky, literally saying no action should be taken until the appeal has been concluded and all of that. So that's one. Some are going to go to the office and get a rude shock of a letter that they weren't expecting. Sudden death of a child. The governor of, I think it was Nasarawa State, unfortunately, just lost a child not long after that child got married. And so all those things come, in addition to all of the things that are already happening to us in the world. Most certainly, what you are saying is that we need to prepare for these things. Help us. Help the Nigerian watching now to get a kind of mental balance of preparing for these unfortunate incidents that we don't want, but as you said, we have to live at the risk of?
Well, just like you've mentioned, we cannot prepare for every threat or every risk. But what we can do is that we can learn or choose how we respond to them when they do happen to us. I'm going to talk about, use examples like you've shared, the ones of losing loved ones or losing a child. These are things that nobody prays for. Nobody prays to experience this. And that means that nobody wants to prepare for things like that when they do happen. But the reality of things is that when these things happen, you have to face them. You have to deal with them. The good news is that our human brain is also designed to help us heal from experiences like this, shocks like this, like you've mentioned. Unfortunately, the healing process is not a pleasant one, right? It's not a pleasant one. And grief, for example, for many people, doesn't taste good, doesn't feel good. And so many people, when they experience things like this, are trying to avoid or run away from the pain. But in reality, what they should be doing is, thinking about or talking to people about ways to actually face the pain, because it's a healing process. You're starting from the shock to some people, the anger. And I'm sure a lot of people are angry looking at all that we're experiencing, to, in some cases, bargaining, where you're trying to figure out, okay, what can I do to mitigate the situation? And then some people might even experience some bit of depression or sadness. But the key thing for us, even when we talk about grief or talk about experiences like this, is to get to a place of acceptance, where you get to accept. So if a person got a letter from work and saying, oh, we don't want you anymore, you need to get to a point where you say, hey, you know what? This is the situation of things. I come to accept it. And one thing about acceptance is that it should actually come with responsibility, where you then ask yourself, okay, now I've come to accept this. What can I do about it? What next? Exactly. Yeah. Now, we do not in any way ignore the fact that that journey could be stressful. That journey could be distressing for so many people. And that's why we say, for example, using grief as the example, and this extends to many other situations like you've mentioned, is that there's no right or wrong way to go through this. So we're never going to say to you, hey, you know what, it must be this way, or it has to be this way, because we know everybody would respond differently. And because we also know that your response is usually also most times linked to your previous experiences, right? So the experiences you've had before could prepare you. So a person who has lost someone before might, again, in quotes, be better prepared to handle such grief, right? A person who has lost a job before and bounced back might be better prepared to handle another, job loss. Again, this is not universal, but experiences could help us. And in cases where you've not had that experience, you could take your time, but most importantly, have that mindset that, hey, I need to do something to get out of this situation, because that's the goal.
Can any of this lead to depression?
Yes, significantly. One of the causes or one of the triggers for depression could be environmental factors, situational factors, right? So when these things start to happen, of course, they could trigger. But the most important thing we need to understand is that they do not do this directly. So the fact that I'm experiencing, we cannot say that, oh, because we're experiencing all these things, that people will be depressed. However, having to go through shock and stressful experiences like the ones that we've mentioned could lead us to begin to see life, negatively, right? We begin to see things negatively.
Is that what depression is?
No, we're getting there, right? Okay. So when we look at what we call the cognitive triad of depression, what we say here is that people are likely going to break down with depression if they begin to see themselves negatively, see the world negatively, and see other people negatively. Now, this is because when they begin to see things negatively, it also affects the kind of chemicals that the brain would secrete, right? And one very important chemical, during the treatment of depression is serotonin. So that tells us that, hey, if the serotonin level starts to drop, there's a likelihood that over time it leads to other symptoms that we can then look at as depression. So by the way, before you diagnose anyone of depression, you need to look at the duration and the number of symptoms that they're experiencing. So you might likely see low mood, you might likely see loss of interest in pleasurable activities, irregular sleep patterns, irregular appetite. You're likely also going to see some feelings of hopelessness, helplessness. Some people even begin to engage in risky behaviors. And you can have this list go on, but at least if you have 4 of these symptoms over a period of 6 months, you're likely going to say, hey, this person is depressed. But if these symptoms come with suicidal thoughts, then you're looking at 2 weeks to make the diagnosis and say, hey, you know what, this is depression. So, and like I said, this can be triggered by environmental factors, altering the person's way of seeing themselves, seeing the world, or seeing the future, which affects chemical secretions and over time can predispose them to depression.
The chemical secretion that you mentioned now just provoked a question in me.
Okay.
What are the consequences for people? Because, I mean, you've said it's a journey, it's a process, it's not certain how long it'll take for each individual. People respond to things differently. What are the consequences of psychological instability or imbalance, I don't know if that's a professional term, that is unchecked because the fellow is so overwhelmed by the situation? What are the consequences, whether metabolical or whatever consequences, and why someone needs to shape up as quickly as possible?
Well, so there are a lot of positive and as well negative consequences, and I'll use the word being exposed to stress or stressors. Now, typically, the biological journey is that when you are exposed to stress, your body tends to respond. And what your body does is, or what our body would do, is that our body tries to help us cope with the stress, right? And how will it do that? It secretes some chemicals. Some people are familiar with a chemical called adrenaline, cortisol. Now, these are chemicals that, are typical stress chemicals and are designed to help us cope with stressful situations. Now, what do? Is that they increase our body metabolism. So it's almost like they give us some bit of a boost to be able to handle the situation. And that's a good thing, right? However, this is where the risk is. The risk is that for many of us, the body is not designed to handle these, chemicals for a long time. And so when it goes beyond our normal threshold or a certain duration, then these chemicals that were intended or designed to help us would then begin to hurt us. Wow. Right? They start to hurt us. And so the idea here is that people should take their health as their responsibility, and also learn to understand the warning signs. Learn to understand, because the body would always speak. Before it gets to a point where this thing starts to become negative, the body would give you signs. But many of us don't even know what the signs are, or we even ignore the signs, and then that could lead to a breakdown. And this is not just psychological breakdown. It could also lead to physical health breakdowns as well. Other illnesses like, concerns with high blood pressure, concerns with diabetes, concerns with immunity, and even reproduction as well. It could cut across every other physical signs and frequent illnesses here and there. And some people say, hey, this is village people, but it's not. it's not village, because you go to the hospital and the doctor tells you, oh, you're fine, just go and rest. And you say, no, this doctor doesn't know what to say. And by the time you go to 2 or 3 doctors, you're like, no, it must be that woman that saw me leaving the village during December. But we know it's not that. We know that it's just because your body has been overwhelmed by these chemicals and they're causing problem now.
So where do we go from here?
We need to become proactive. And I think being proactive simply means that we're taking our health as our responsibility. Right? We're taking our health as our responsibility. There's a strong connection between every aspect of health: psychological, physical,
I was just
social.
going to say, we're talking about our mental health now. Not, I have mosquito bites.
Mosquito bites.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about mental health.
Well, there's a strong connection between all of them, right? In fact, in mental health, we say that you cannot have health without mental health.
True.
Right? Because we understand that there's a strong interaction. Even when we talk about...
But you can have mental health without the other one.
Without physical health.
Yes.
Again, no, because if a person has a physical health concern, it's likely going to also affect their mental health. Imagine... I
have a little rash on my hand. It doesn't affect me mentally.
Well, it depends on how much emphasis you place on the rash. For example, if you're concerned about, hey, if I have this rash and people see this rash, what would it mean?
Yeah.
That is likely going to affect your self-esteem, because now you're in the garden.
No, it's not for you. It's not for you.
It's hidden. It's hidden. So it doesn't matter.
To you.
And some other people extremely finicky.
Exactly.
Wow. What if it spreads? And then it now come there.
Or what if it's a sign of monkeypox or something like that? Now you see that concern can then evolve to anxiety, and that could affect your mental well-being.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Well, Any more questions?
No more questions, Your Honor.
Dr. Chris Aboje, mental health consultant. Every time you come here, it's something very heavy we're talking about, you know, looking after my mental health.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, I would say to people that there are 3 things that they can do to protect themselves in this situation. Number 1 is being able to intentionally focus on the positives. Avoid listening to the news. Don't go and stay and be like, hey, what's going to happen?
Excuse me.
Now, what I know.
That's our job.
So I would say limit that, right? Especially negative news, right?
But I think a major takeaway from
Yeah.
what you said so far is that people should gain perspectives
Exactly.
that are functional to the whole thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Good place to anchor it, my partner. Thank you very much for helping us to summarize everything.
Oh, no. Well, you know, that's what you do as a journalist. You summarize the 3-hour news into 3 minutes or less.
And that's our show for today. We'll see you next time. I am Alero Edu.
That's a summary of the program. Am I Makinde? Please go get your PVC. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Bye.